In a world of information overload, in a world dominated by biased pay-to-play advertorials, in a world riddled with fraudsters, fakes, and phonies, one voice stands out to provide reliable information to investors, business owners, and busy professionals, unbiased and beholden to no one. This is Financial Poise Radio, the spoken word sister of financialpoise.com, the internet's most trustworthy resource about finance, investing, business, and law.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Financial Poise Radio. I am Christopher Cahill. I will be speaking later with Michelle Gershfeld, bankruptcy attorney and financial fitness coach in New York. This will be about personal finance. Michelle founded Get Financially Fit, which is also the byline under which she writes a regular column for Financial Poise. Today is May 16, 2016, as I tape this, a notable day in the history of investing in the United States. For today, the rules enabling what I've always called for real crowdfunding came into effect. What do I mean? I mean that as a result of these rules coming into effect under Title III of the Jobs Act, every investor, not just accredited investors, but investors of any income level, may invest in private equity, may be the objects of general solicitation. It means in practice is that all of us can go to funding platforms or funding portals on the web that sell such equity interests, of course, subject to the somewhat stringent rules that went into effect today. In honor of the occasion, Dave Friedman, who with Matthew Nutting wrote the book on for real crowdfunding, wrote an article entitled Equity Crowdfunding Starts Today. Here's Where to Find Startup Investment. That article can be found on the Crowdfunding Investor sub-site via www.financialpoise.com. And Mr. Friedman identifies three funding portals in particular as up and at 'em, ready to roll with offerings for all of us. One is called WeFunder, WeFunder.com. Second is StartEngine.com. The third, NextSeed.com. We're of course not, and neither is he, endorsing any of these sites, but there's three places you can go with the opportunity of investing under the new rules. Of course, you can do that without leaving your house. It's one of the great things about our current lives, if we don't have to leave the house or even leave your chair to do anything. You live in front of the computer, you eat in front of the computer. And while you're doing that, according to the Financial Poise article, Edible Utensils of Change, May 9, 2016, edible cutlery has been invented. So you don't have to feel bad about, plastic spoons and forks proliferating. Maybe one of these services that'll send you food when you're sitting on your behind looking at your computer will start using this edible cutlery, which you can just eat, maybe feed to your dog or something. Edible cutlery is made from sorghum, a type of millet. I have no idea, by the way, whether such a food would be good for your dog, so don't take that as an endorsement either. Meanwhile, speaking of where we've come to in the modern world, the Chicago Daily Law Bulletin of April 24, 2016, had a feature article about a lawyer, and it's entitled, Meet the Man Disrupting Silicon Valley. That man is Jay Edelson, the CEO of Edelson PC, with offices in Chicago and San Francisco. Whom does he sue? He sues Facebook, Google, Amazon, Apple, Netflix, 1, 2, 3, 4, the five horsemen of the apocalypse, according to privacy advocates like Mr. Edelson. He actually doesn't say that. But he sues them for privacy law violations. He has had them cough up over $1 billion over his years of suing them. Facebook, Google, Amazon, Apple, and Netflix are all tremendously successful companies. So many, you might say, see utopia in our contemporary arrangement of technology and daily living. Well, Edelson sees a kind of dystopia. Utopia was a word that was coined by Sir Thomas More from the Greek words for no and place. So no place, a place that doesn't exist, because he was writing about an imaginary place. Dystopia is also from the Greek for bad, abnormal kind of place. So bad place, no place to bad place. I should mention that Sir Thomas More was also a lawyer. He was Lord High Chancellor of England from 1529 to 1532, later a Catholic martyr and saint whose head was chopped off by Henry VIII. Well, he coined utopia as the title for a tract he had written. This no place was a political system of an imaginary island nation. More named the book in Greek, wrote it in Latin, presumably because of the controversy over its contents. It was later translated long after More's death. Notably, in the utopia of More, there are no lawyers. Well, his utopia inspired other utopias. 100 years later, Sir Francis Bacon, also, by the way, Lord High Chancellor of England, the top lawyer of the land, 1617 to 21, inspired by More, wrote The New Atlantis. Now, the utopia that Bacon envisioned was not so much like More's and much more familiar to us, for his utopia was premised on liberating human beings through science and knowledge. The science, knowledge, and, though he didn't use the word technology, the estate of man would be eased. Life would be easier. Francis Bacon has been credited, I think, correctly with being a founder of the modern world. You might say that Facebook, Google, Apple, Amazon, and Netflix ease our estate or reflect a point at which our estate has been so eased that you don't even have to leave your behind in order to get social media and connection with people all over the world, information from all the world's libraries, information about everything. You can buy anything on Amazon and have it sent to your house. You can get any kind of entertainment that is two-dimensional entertainment via Netflix. All of this without moving. Well, for Edelson, all of this utopia has come at the cost of the privacy of the human personality. Well, the United States Supreme Court spoke today. Today, the United States Supreme Court issued an opinion on a case brought by Edelson as lawyer for someone named Robbins. And Edelson's client lost. So, what can we say about this lawsuit? It's kind of important. Well, it's under the Fair Credit Reporting Act, which requires consumer reporting agencies to follow reasonable procedures to assure maximum possible accuracy of consumer reports, and imposes liability on any person who willfully fails to comply with any requirements of the Act. Spokio, which many of you know to be information site on individuals, Spokio is the entity sued by Robbins. So the Supreme Court case in Spokio Inc. v. Robbins was alleged by Robbins to be a consumer reporting agency subject to the Fair Credit Reporting Act, and that the Spokio generated profile for Mr. Robbins contained inaccurate information. So Robbins, with Edelson, filed a federal class action complaint. Well, the Supreme Court did not decide that there was no violation, or I should say, did not decide that Spokio followed the Fair Credit Reporting Act. I mean, think about what Robbins said. He said that the Spokio generated profile contained inaccurate information, so give me damages. Give all of us in the class damages. It doesn't quite work that simply. In order to have standing to sue in American courts, you have to have suffered something real. I'm putting that informally. The formal requirement is injury in fact, and that was the issue in the case. The Supreme Court found that Robbins did not allege a true injury in fact. His injury that he alleged was not sufficiently concrete and particularized, was not sufficiently actual or imminent, and was rather conjectural or hypothetical. I mean, the doctrine in this area is a little bit complex, and it involves making fine distinctions. I am sure that Mr. Edelson will live to sue another day We all know of problems with stolen identities and so, which must be more of an injury in fact than what Mr. Robbins was alleging. So the legal onslaught will continue, or the vindication of privacy rights will continue as you look at it, and our utopia or our dystopia will be modified thereby. Let's go to the interview. I'm here with Michelle Gershfeld, who is a personal financial planning counselor and bankruptcy attorney. I know bankruptcy attorneys. I'm a bankruptcy attorney. Anyway, Michelle coaches people who are in debt or building wealth by identifying and overcoming obstacles that lie in their path toward worry-free financial wellness. Her enterprise is Get Financially Fit, which partners with each client to create a strategic, customized plan for his or her unique financial situation, tackling challenges while defining actionable steps aimed at increasing awareness, changing behaviors, and leading to the fulfillment of long-term financial goals. Ms. Gershfeld is also, I am proud to say, a regular columnist with Financial Poise. Hello, Michelle. Thank you for being with us.
Hi, Chris. I'm so happy to be here.
All right. Now, we've all heard about he said, she said controversies. Well, we're not going to have that today, but I do want to do some she said. Michelle, you have said, quote, paying interest is a penalty, making interest is a reward, end quote. Please explain.
Well, of course, that's a key element of financial literacy. People do not understand what they're getting themselves into when they take on debt, and they lack basic financial know-how to save money and to wisely invest that money, and they lack the realization that by not saving now, they're cheating themselves out of stability and financial security in the future. So when they take on debt unknowingly, they're paying interest, and that's a penalty. And sometimes they don't see it. They just allow it to happen. They think they're just carrying a balance of money that is their money that the bank is allowing them to have vis-a-vis a credit card. And unless they actually look at their statements, which many people aren't doing, they continue to pay that interest, and they're losing opportunities by doing that. Whereas if they took the same money and invested it, that would be a reward. So people who understand about the basics of the savings actually like to open up their mail and get their bank statements and see that the money is increasing. So that's where I say making interest is a reward, paying interest is a penalty.
All right, well, that's a nice dictum to keep in mind. But I have another dictum in mind, which is based upon my vast learning in the Talmud. Okay, that statement was a little bit fictional because I don't have that vast learning. However, there's a dictum of the Talmud. All beginnings are difficult. And I can back that up with a dictum from Tao Te Ching. A journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step. And finally, I'd like to utter another dictum of Michelle Gershfeld. If you broke one window in your home, you would fix it, not break all of the other windows. So, Michelle, how do we get started, and what fundamental orientation should one have in getting started?
Well, I think the first thing that people need to know is that they have to have a plan. So just expecting that I'm going to make money and I'm making a lot of money and therefore I have a lot of money and I don't really have to think about it is not the way to start. The first way is to say, I have a set amount of income, and I have a set amount of expenses, and I'm going to start saving right from the beginning. So even if you're in debt today, if you haven't saved one penny, and you think that everything else is a priority, I think you have to reevaluate your situation and start saving. So if a person,
So if it's $50 this month, that's better than not saving anything.
Absolutely. You have to pay yourself first. You have to start today. If your basic needs don't allow you to save any money, you need to focus on reworking those basic needs. Because you need to have emergency savings. You need to have peace of mind. You need to be responsible for yourself. And that's a big piece that's missing in our society.
Well, you and I had talked about this, and you made some remarks that I thought were quite great on credit card statements and looking at them. An exercise that we should go through, not just be horrified by how much you have to pay or trying just to get through this month, but really looking at the credit card statement.
So the example that I had discussed with you when we spoke last was a person who carries $20,000 in credit card debt, for example. So if you had $20,000 in credit card debt, and let's just use for example's sake that you were paying 16% interest, which these days is low, and your investment rate of return is 6%, which may be high. In 1 year, you might pay on that basis interest of $3,500 in a year. So you may not really notice that in your overall life. $300 extra a month, well, it's $20,000. We let it go up, we let it go down. When we get our bonus at the end of the year, sometimes we pay it off. And people here have the sense that they're going to pay off. It's always going to look better the next day or the next week or the next month. But my view is if you don't have the money today, you're not going to have it tomorrow, and you shouldn't be spending it. But getting back to the example, so that $3,500 a year in the first year, after 20 years, you will have spent in interest alone $70,000. Over 40 years, if you carry that same debt, it would be almost $140,000, and that's just the interest. Now, what I want to talk about is if you put that money into an investment so you could earn interest on the interest, so you save the $3,500 instead of spending it on interest to the bank, in the first year you'd have $3,500, right, extra than what you are paying. In 20 years, you'd have the $70,000 I just spoke of, but you'd also have 6% interest if you were investing it. So that might give you $127,000. In 40 years, now on my example, if you carried that in a credit card debt, you would have paid $138,000 in interest. But in effect, you would have lost $500,000 because it would be $138,000 plus all of the interest that you're paying for using someone else's money at 16%. Now, from the bank's point of view, they make 16% interest. So if they took your $3,500 at 16% instead of 6%, they would have collected your $138,000 in interest. And how much would they have turned that into? Any idea?
No. Go ahead, please.
$12 million.
$12
million.
$12
million.
By lending it out to other schmucks who pay 16% interest.
That's right. That's right. The best way you can jump yourself towards financial success is to commit to buy only what you can afford.
Yeah, and that's the other thing about the credit card statement that I was hoping you would talk about, which is looking at what you're actually buying.
Right. And I love that one too. So here's something that I tell my clients all the time when they're first starting with me and they think, Michelle, I just don't know where my money goes. I know I make good money, and yet every time it comes to the day before my next paycheck, my bank account is nil. And so an example that I love to use with people is, okay, well, let's just pull out the credit card statement. Let's just see what you've done in the past month. And I have 3 highlighters, and one is green for everything that you need. So highlight everything that you really needed, whatever you had to buy groceries, you had to buy, whatever your basic needs are. Now I want you to highlight in blue everything that you wanted, that meant something to you and you wanted it. So those are your wants. And now I want you to highlight in red everything that was just completely unnecessary, wasteful, immediate gratification, gluttonous, but at the time seemed good, but now that it's, 25 days later and you have to pay for it, things that you realize, wow, that was just a waste of my money. And people are alarmed mostly at what they spend in food and lattes. And I'm not against the coffee industry, and I know every financial person tells people, well, the first place to stop is with the Starbucks. I'm not telling you not to drink coffee, and I'm not telling you not to go to Starbucks. I'm telling you, how much is that Starbucks really worth to you? Really, when you look at the numbers and you see at the end of the day how your money could be otherwise going towards opportunities. So when you wake up on Monday morning and you say, I hate my job, I really don't want to do this, but I'm stuck because I owe all of this money and I have to go to this job, well, maybe it's time to say, I could do with a few less lattes and have some savings so that if I decide I want to change my career or if I decide I want to do something, you have the money and the flexibility to make those decisions.
Well, indeed, Starbucks is often called $4, but If you look at it not just as purchase price of the coffee that you're imbibing once or twice a day, 5 days a week at least, but also look at it as investment diverted to that consumption. What you're losing isn't just the $4, but also the investment income you could have made. So it's really not $4. It's more like over the 40-year time period, $8 or $10, isn't it?
Right.
Well, so let's talk for a while about people who are in real trouble. You are a bankruptcy lawyer. You've done some work with Chapter 7 trustees. So you've seen a lot of people in real trouble, and you counsel people in real trouble. But where does one start advising a person who's in real trouble?
Well, I guess it depends on your definition of what real trouble is. And I like to tell people right away that money is not everything. It doesn't define you. I've seen it all. Nothing really shocks me at all. I've seen people snort their money, drink their money, gamble their money, lose it to medical illness, lose it to failed businesses, failed marriages. So the first thing I like to tell people is not to define themselves by whatever their money missteps might have been in the past. I appreciate that you recognize there's a problem, and that's really the first thing you need to do. Recognize that there's a problem, and then make a plan. So there are different theories, of course, as to how somebody might pay off their debt or deal with it. Of course, there are those that say pay the highest interest debt first and do that snowball effect of getting rid of it. But in my view, well, first it's more important that you pay yourself first. So that might be very different than what other financial advisors might say. But no matter what money you're bringing in, my view is you have to keep some money on the side for yourself and start building yourself an emergency savings, because only you can rely on only you. That being said, I then focus on the debts that wouldn't be discharged if the person filed bankruptcy. So some debt, even if you file a bankruptcy, you're not discharged from taxes, student loans, domestic support obligations, and I want to impress upon people who are, as you say, in real trouble, that this debt isn't going to go away. You know, whether you file bankruptcy, if you don't pay it, it's going to continue to accrue interest and perhaps penalties, and it'll grow and grow and ultimately, in many cases, be deducted from your Social Security. So I want to focus on savings and getting rid of the debt that's not going to go away. Unsecured debt, which is that revolving credit card debt that we just spoke of, I'm a big proponent of negotiating that debt. And I don't think you have to file a bankruptcy to do that. I think that in this society that we live in, people are carrying abundant debt and servicing that debt to their personal demise financially. And there are ways to deal with the debt, such as stop paying. Just stop paying it. Because the creditors are not going to negotiate with you while you're paying. And that, again, may be a cutting-edge thing to say, but if you are so deeply insolvent or in debt that you're considering filing bankruptcy or don't really know what to do, of course, you may seek advice, and I would be happy to talk to you, and there are certainly financial counselors out there available. I don't think the first step is bankruptcy. A lot of people have that knee-jerk reaction, I want to file bankruptcy and get a fresh start and put this behind me. But that, to me, isn't the answer. That's a Band-Aid, because if you file a bankruptcy, then what? I mean, people need help navigating their financial lives and coming up with how are they going to make a spending and a savings plan.
Okay, well, let's backing away from the financial thing and dealing with credit card debt one last time. You're going to call up some company, credit card company or bank, and say, I owe you $20,000 and you want $475 from me every month. I can't pay that. How about if we cut this to $15,000? How about if I give you $100 a month? How do you do this?
No, you just have to stop paying. So what happens in that situation, right? If you call and ask them to negotiate with you and you try to be very honest and very nice, they're not really going to be interested in you. So what happens, generally speaking, is you stop paying the credit card debt, and then you start getting some nasty letters and maybe phone calls that you owe this money, and eventually, generally speaking, the credit card companies will then sell that debt. So they write it off as bad debt, and they sell it to the collection agency. The collection agency will buy that debt for pennies on a dollar, and then they'll come after you with a vengeance. So at that point, depending on where you are, but again, we're talking about people who are really deep in debt. At that point, you don't really answer the phone calls. You certainly don't want to get on the phone with these collection agencies and tell them, oh, yes, I'll start paying you $20 a month. Anytime you tell them that you're going to pay them anything, you basically reopen statute of limitations or the ability for those creditors to start the clock on how long it is that they can pursue you for. If you don't pay the debt at all for 7 years, it goes off of your credit card. That's not to say that you won't get sued. You may get sued. And at that point, when they start bringing collection action, against you, it is at that point that you call them up and say, I'd like to settle this debt, because chances are it's now with somebody else. They've paid a lot less on that debt than what it actually is the face value, and they'll be willing to take less, because if you clearly tell them the opportunity right now is for them to get some money, or if not, they're going to sue you and you'll file bankruptcy and they'll get nothing, all of a sudden they seem to be very willing to negotiate.
I guess what you're saying is, of course, counterintuitive in a lot of ways, as you have said, at least counterintuitive morally, some might say. But isn't it true that when you counsel people, it's part of a larger reorientation of them? I mean, you've said finances are about your relationship with money. I'm going to ask you to explain that in a second, but I assume that by the time you're negotiating with the third or fourth holder of this credit card debt, you've already changed your relationship with money and not simply tried to skate.
Well, I'm not so sure about that, but you actually had me at morally.
Yeah.
So I want to just get back to the morally part first, because I view this whole money situation as a game, just like a board game that you would play, and there are rules, and you have to play by the rules, and I'm all about playing by the rules. So when you talk about morality, I think that's a very different conversation. These are business decisions. If you are so far in debt that you can't service the debt that you already have, that creditor gave you money and made a bad decision, because you can't do it. You can't get blood from a stone. So even our bankruptcy laws provide for people to have exemptions. You're allowed to file bankruptcy and walk away with equity in your house, with money in your bank account. There are different exemptions, federal and statewide, but morally has to do with something different than finances. Finances have to do with, this is a business decision. So yes, I understand you took the money, you feel bad, you're a moral person, you believe you should pay all your obligations. But if you don't have the money, if you simply don't make enough because the interest is compounding at 25% and no one ever taught you about compounding interest, well, I don't think that's a moral decision. I think that's a problem with our education system and with the creditors extending that much credit to you. And now, wherever you are, if you're in that situation, I need you to be able to say, hey, I have to breathe. I have to sleep at night. I have to feed my family. Where are my priorities? And my priority is the very least to the unsecured creditor. I would say a big bank name at this point, but I don't want to do that because that's not really my point. My point is I do care. The client and the person who's suffering is my main concern. And how can I get that person to be a better member of society, feeling better, sleeping at night, not feeling ashamed, not feeling terrified or embarrassed or sick physically, psychologically, emotionally. We have to get a hold of where are you now and how can we get you back into a safe and secure place where you can continue to work and earn money and set yourself up for some financial security. So if you're chasing, in my earlier example of the $20,000, if you're spending your whole life chasing that $20,000, you're never going to get ahead for yourself, and who's going to take care of you? At the end of the day, when it's time to retire, what are you going to do? There's not going to be any money for you. And that's the thing that it just drives me crazy about how can we be having our society get so deeply in debt and saying, oh, spend, increase the stimulus for the economy. And I just heard on the news the other day, oh, spending was up and everybody's so happy. But to what effect that we have 75% of Americans walking around paycheck to paycheck. And if they get in trouble, the statistic is something like most Americans don't have $1,000 to pay for an emergency. How can this be healthy for our economy and our citizens as a whole, when really instead of being citizens, we've now become consumers?
Well, Michelle, let's turn it then away from the most desperate cases, although each of us could become that if we make the wrong kinds of mistakes. Or let's go to the accredited investors, which the Financial Poise site, Accredited Investor Markets, is pointed to. These are people who are kind of making it, or at least they seem to be. They have a six-figure income. What are some of the lies six-figure income people tell themselves? What are some of the ways they approach debt and credit and so forth that are suboptimal, as someone might say?
Okay, I love that. So these are some of the lies that these high-income people tell themselves. I know it all. I don't need a plan. I'm never going to make less money. That's a really big one. People think that when they're in their 30s and 40s and they're making top incomes and they're doing great. And something that I personally am seeing a lot of right now is people who were in that category just a minute ago are now in their 50s and early 60s, and they're out of work. And they were high earners, and they can't find a job because the younger generation is coming in, taking less money with more skills, and now they're, for the first time in their lives, looking for work and not finding it so quickly. Then they think another lie that they tell themselves is, I can worry about the future in the future, or I'm going to win the lottery, or use the silver bullet method, which is I'll just kill myself when I run out of money, which of course no one's doing that. So I think that it's a mixture of lies they tell themselves and really false beliefs, again, because the education is lacking. I personally think when our students in high school start signing up for these student loans, that at that moment there should be, and at the time that they sign any kind of credit application, there should be, similar to when you file a bankruptcy and you have to take a credit course, there should be that credit course when our students, our future generation is signing up for these trillions of dollars in debt. Shouldn't they be made to take a course that's 30 minutes long to say, look, this is how much money you think you're going to borrow in student loans. Let's look at how much actual income potential you have. Let's look at what it's going to look like to pay that money back so that these kids know before they sign a dotted line, I'm going to have to pay back $1,000 a month, and maybe that might let them think, maybe I shouldn't take out an extra $5,000 to go to Italy on spring break. Maybe I actually should just take the bare minimum that I need so that I'm not spending all of that future income of mine on these 3 years or 4 years.
Well, I should mention that there's an NBA basketball player named Kawhi Leonard, extremely talented, can do everything right for the San Antonio Spurs. And I was told yesterday about the 1990-something truck that he drives. And the other example is that I have is Marshawn Lynch, the retired running back for the Seattle Seahawks, an excellent football player, who banked all of his earnings as a football player. He spent only what he made in endorsements, but he banked every dollar of his tens of millions, maybe even 100 million in football earnings, because he had a certain relationship with his finances that's opposed to the relationship you were just drawing. But I guess some of this is rooted not just in TV and the governmental policy, but also in family habits, right?
Absolutely. That's where we get our money, a lot of our money knowledge from. It's not required in our school system. So the people that I talk to, very often, it's so important to get an understanding from people of where they are from where they came. So, and I've heard stories about children who had parents who were gamblers, one person was telling me his father just pulled out a wad of cash at every opportunity. So as far as he knew, dad just had a wad of cash, just was there. I spoke to somebody else this week, actually, who said, I don't take my kid to the ATM machine because I don't want him to think that money just comes out of the building. I thought was so great. I think that it's really, really important to speak to people and understand what their history is and where their emotional behaviors with respect to money come from, and to help them see that in a different light. And here again, awareness and talking to people. People don't talk about money. That's a big taboo in our society, right? People will talk about sex, they'll talk about drugs, they'll talk about, everything else under the sun. How many people talk about money? Yes, I know, Chris, you're talking about money, and I'm talking about money. But generally speaking, people don't speak about money. And there, again, if we could have an open dialogue and people could be comfortable to say, you know what, I can't go out to dinner with you this week. It's not in my budget. Instead of, well, I'll just swipe it on the card. And I feel miserable about going out to dinner and have the food sitting in their throat the whole time because they know they really can't afford to be out to dinner. But they don't know how to say no.
I've always thought that, or maybe more recently thought, I can't say I've always thought this, but when you find out about people who escaped from communism or communism escaped them in the late 80s, early 90s, and then came over here not knowing much English, yet they knew enough to live cheap, to live carefully, save their money and buy the building they were living in, and then use that as a pledge to buy other buildings so that by the time, they're the age of 60, they have 8 or 9 properties. Their kids have gotten through college. They don't owe anybody a cent. That is a great American success story, but it's also built on making the right choices early. I think choices more or less in line with what you've described. This is the kind of person maybe we should be bringing into our schools. Somebody whose English
we
isn't
should bring
very
anybody
good,
in. Anybody who talks about anything would be better than what we have now. What we have right now is be gluttonous. Buy. Everything is so easily available. Now I just saw about this dash button. Do you know about the dash button?
No.
Through Amazon Prime. Amazon Prime, people can buy a little button, and they have limited products right now. But, for example, you put this little button by your Tide or, your detergent, and when you run out of detergent, all you have to do is hit the button, and it will automatically renew and refill your last Tide order. So now people don't even have to get online to order their detergent. They can just hit the button, which, of course, now they have no reason to know what the price is, what they're paying. They're sucked right into Amazon, whatever price Amazon wants to charge once they agree to that situation.
I guess it's bad enough that kids are basically innumerate in larger numbers these days, but they no longer know what checks are, and there's a push to make them never actually feel cash in their hands, but rather just point their phones at things and buy. That has to accelerate. As we make money more abstract, it has to make it harder to have a proper relationship with it, I would think anyway.
Right. I'm a big fan of paying cash and feel what it feels like to spend the money that you've earned. And again, if you don't have the money to use the credit card, don't use the credit card. And if you do use the credit card, you better be prepared to pay the full amount when that bill comes. So, and get back to basics. I mean, just what you spoke of, a situation that doesn't really happen anymore about people saving and scrimping. I love to think of an episode of Little House on the Prairie, from, I guess, the 70s or 80s, and they would get for Christmas oranges, and that would be just the greatest gift. They were so happy for the sweetness of the orange, the juice of the orange. That was their Christmas present. And here, today, there's not enough to satisfy all of the wants and needs, and people are feeling pressure to give their kids everything and beyond, and not teaching their kids, hey, you know what, we really can't afford the Xbox and the trip away and summer camp and all of these things, but they don't want to say no to their kids, so they just continually get themselves further in debt and feel, again, I'm going to win the lottery, I'll start saving aggressively as soon as the kids graduate, and putting off the real life situation that they're in, putting their head in the sand and thinking, well, I'll worry about that tomorrow. I'm working so hard. I'm entitled. I need to have this all, and I need to have it now.
Well, I tend to think that this conversation, in which you mentioned, by the way, gluttony early, sort of turns around two deadly sins as kind of poles, gluttony and envy. To quote the Talmud again, of which I do not have extensive knowledge, but I've pulled a few quotes. Who is rich? He who is content with his lot. You mentioned going out to dinner and having the food stuck in your mouth because you couldn't say no. Why? Because you needed to be like them. So I guess, what's the single most important message you want to get across to our listeners? Well,
the single most important message would be plan, plan, plan. plan. But that also goes hand in hand with money is not everything. So there are a lot of other things in this world that we have to focus ourselves on, counting our blessings, being grateful for the things that we do have. In many instances, these are first world problems that we're discussing, right? People, not everybody, and I'm not saying that there's not a lot of poverty right here in the United States, but to the people who are our listeners, the investors that are listening to our show today, be grateful for what we do have. Stop comparing yourselves to others. Choose to be a giver. Choose to see things from a positive light. Make a plan for yourself and be a realist.
Well, that is a great point, I think, at which to conclude this meditation on debt, spending, and your relationship with money.
Well, thank you so much for having me on the show today, and I really do love my people, all of our listeners. I want to give everybody the inspiration that you can do it. You are wonderful. There's a whole lot to you more than your money, and if you're in a mess right now, let's take the bull by the horns and move forward from here.
Well, Michelle Gershfeld of Get Financially Fit and of a nice law firm out in New York. Thanks again for joining us on Financial Poise Radio.
Thank you.
Financial Poise Radio is produced by Stephanie Strait. For informative reading on your financial world and more, please click on www.financialpoise.com. I am Christopher Cahill, bidding you adieu until next time.
Thank you for joining us. If you enjoyed this episode, you can subscribe through iTunes or Stitcher, or you can download our app from Libsyn. You can also listen right on our website, www.financialpoise.com. Each week, Financial Poise Radio brings you news and education about finance, investing, business, and law. To see a short written summary of this episode, go to www.financialpoise.com. Financial Poise Radio is a production of Financial Poise Radio Productions, LLC.